I would like to do the honor by inviting Shri Sraddhalu Ranade ji, ladies and gentlemen, here on the stage. He's a scientist, he's a scholar, and he has been residing at Shri Aurobindo Ashram since he was 6 months old. And we are honored to have you here with us, sir. Please, with your huge round of applause, let's welcome Shri Sraddhalu Ranade ji.
In most of the discourse on anti-aging, age regression or longevity and youthfulness, the trend today is to rely on the approach of modern science, which looks at us as a product of our biology. Our mind, our emotions are ripples, electrical signals, hormonal changes in our cellular biological working. This is the approach bottom up. It's extremely effective within its narrow scope. The yogic perspective and our subjective experience, all of us, is we are first mind which has a body. The deeper truth, though, which is not always immediately obvious but inevitably awakens within our life, is we are not even mind. We are soul, we are spirit, which has mind, which has emotions, which has body. And if this be the case, spirit is essentially more powerful than matter because matter is product of spirit. And a top-down approach, therefore, if properly exercised, can be far more effective than a bottom-up approach. But ideally, what we would want is a dual approach in which each complements the other. So this is the broad sense of perspective which I would like to share. When we look at this whole question, the theme which has brought us here of wanting to have eternal youth, immortality, effectively that's what we're talking about indirectly. You observe that going back into the most ancient times, this has been a driving passion in humanity across all civilizations. In the Indian tradition, the most ancient Vedic tradition, you find the rishis address you, us, as children of immortality. Shrinvantu vai amritasya putraha. Listen, hearken, O children of immortality. What is this immortality that they're speaking of which we are already children? That's our origin. And they speak of the Satchidananda as the consciousness which is the immortality, which is the origin of this whole world. They find that immortality not only there, but then seek to realize it here in life. And this is the most ancient tradition that we are aware of. We find other traditions within India, elsewhere, which approach immortality in different ways. In the Egyptian tradition, you will find the attempt to mummify, to preserve the consciousness, but in the process rendering the body rigid, pointless, frozen statue. Or you find in the Hatha Yoga or the Taoist tradition, the utilization of the lever of life energy, prana, chi, by which you modify processes of life working, by which you can regenerate the body. Because we realize inherently all processes are life-driven. And life is capable of extending body as purely logically. You see, a reasonably old woman gives birth to a baby. The baby is completely young but is made of her body's tissue. This baby, when it becomes old, gives birth to another baby which is made of the same body tissue. So if inherently the body has the capacity to produce an entirely new body by life processes, why can it not reproduce its own body? Such would be the logic. And if this is possible, are there inherent means of manipulating life force flows to be able to make this change? And you find in the Hatha Yogi tradition people who live for several hundred years by such manipulation of life force, but it's demanding. It requires you many hours of certain kinds of specialized practices. We find equally in the Tantric tradition utilization of occult means, including alchemical means, to be able to rejuvenate the body. And there's a whole science to that, some of it profoundly symbolic. And in modern science, we find purely material approach, as we mentioned before, relying on supplements, blood transfusions, genetic modifications, epigenetic triggers, lifestyle changes, which is largely much of what we have been discussing here and will continue to discuss. But what you see here is a spectrum from the highest spiritual to the most material and every gradation of consciousness in between. If you look at the totality of these traditions, on every level, an attempt to leverage the potentiality of that level to be able to regenerate life, maintain youth. So if we were to take a comprehensive approach, why start with a single end? Why not tap into all of these? But to be able to do that, we need a comprehensive science in which the interactions between these levels can be described rationally, experientially, in a way that you can apply it into a technology. Such a thing actually exists in what may broadly be called the body of knowledge that is yoga. Yoga is a science which spans all the levels of consciousness, from the highest to the most material, sees them all as a continuum. And by yoga, I mean, as you all know, not just physical postures, what passes in the West as yoga, which is asanas and pranayam, but by that entire body of knowledge. But it is not merely a science, it is also a technology, an applied knowledge, validated on the basis of experience, refined and developed and perfected across centuries. This actually is comprehensive enough to offer us a means, a framework within which the present physical science approach can expand its scope and make a more comprehensive, complete material exploration of these realities and apply this knowledge. Now, this is the background within which I want to give a few examples. And I believe the example which I would like to share would be quite significant because it addresses the question of all that we are discussing today. And what we recognize, and I will try to parallel this, is physical science, material science, and its explorations today, including in genetics and epigenetics, completely parallels and complements the knowledge that comes from the yoga, because they are both evidential processes. They are all both experience and experimentation based and validation based. They are not belief systems. And so there is no contradiction between these two. I want to give one example which comes from the yoga tradition, largely in the utilization of this knowledge, in a process that is referred to as kaya kalpa. Kaya kalpa is, kaya means physical, kalpa is transition, transformation, change. And in the tradition itself, they speak of 18 different kinds of kaya kalpa processes, of which some are reasonably simple, superficial, but there is one particular which is called the Kutir Pravesha Kaya Kalpa, that is, you enter into a dark room. And within that, you go through a process of regeneration and rejuvenation of the body. One of the best descriptions of this in published form today exists in a book which is called Tapasviji, which is written by somebody who lived for 182 years. And he went through the Kaya Kalpa process multiple times during his lifetime. And so we find there certain elements of the description of which I will share specific details as we go along. But in principle, in summary, the form it takes is this person enters a hut, is in complete darkness for a period of so many months on a special diet, and he is told you have to meditate or pray all the time, at the end of which he comes out, having entered at the age of nearly 80, he comes out with a completely new body, at least 20 years younger than what was before, with a new set of teeth and black hair. People cannot recognize him. They recognize him by his voice and the fact that, well, finally, not only the voice is same, it's still the same person. How does that happen? Is it even possible? If you just look at this description, you would say, it's just one of those miraculous dreams or stories which come from some, for children. But we'll look at the processes, and I want to map some of those processes with what we know of current science, and especially the most recent discoveries of aging and anti-aging and rejuvenation. And you will see the close correspondence, and then we will discuss the implications of this. So first of all, we are told that in this process, you are going to be in a room which will be completely dark, but the room has to be cut into the ground, raised walls, and covered with thatch of leaves and wood. We'll come to why these are important. And then in there, you are on a special diet. The diet itself requires a mix of milk from a cow and certain herbs. The milk must be from a cow which is of black skin, and the cow must be not grass-fed, grain-fed. And then the diet itself that you follow starts with a certain quantum of the milk with the herbs mixed, and every day it is reduced. Synchronized with the lunar cycle, the quantum of food you take is reduced until it comes to 0. And then once you hit 0, again it starts growing again, until it rebuilds the body. Now, this is the broad framework as described, and I will now go into the physical scientific validation of each of these processes. First of all, you notice that the milk itself is special from a cow of a specific kind. Why is that important? And all of this will relate to the power that milk has, or the content of milk with tryptophan particularly. So one of the things we find when we observe cows grass-fed and grain-fed cows have much higher levels of protein. The cow which is of black skin has a much higher level of tryptophan. Why are these important? Tryptophan is precursor to melatonin, serotonin, biotin, B3 is it? And various others which are all related to DNA processes, rejuvenation processes, cellular transformation processes. And so first you see one immediate correlation. Yes, there seems to be some logic to it. The second part of this, first of all, so high protein, because at this point you are going to go on a severe diet, caloric restriction, but you want to maintain protein. And yet the protein is going to go down to 0, and we will see why. The next part of the process is this dieting, with which you start with a certain quantum of food and continue to reduce it. As you continue to reduce, the body is being forced into this autophagy. Autophagy kicks in at this point. You're all familiar with this, I don't need to elaborate. Had this discussion taken place 10 years ago, perhaps it would need explanations. But these things are so well known today. While this autophagy is going on, you're not allowing the body to degenerate too rapidly, so there's a high level of protein there. But that also is reducing until such a point when you go into extreme fasting, at some point the muscular proteins begin to break down. And at that point, your entire body becomes extremely weak. Why is this necessary? Remember, you cannot take an old body and replace tissue without breaking down past tissue. And yet it has to be done in a continuum without destroying, well, killing the body. So there's a process going on. At the point where the autophagy is maximized and the food is 0, the body is so weak, as it is described in the experience in the book, this person is unable to get up. He's lying down all through. He's unable to get up. His body is so weak, his teeth fall out. The gums have become loose. And at that point, the stem cells have been kicked in with a certain intensity. They start reproducing. Now, the key element is the stem cells, as you know, have their roots not only inside the bone, in the core of the bone, but also within the teeth. You're all familiar with this. Wherever stem cells are there are being activated in great power. And a new set of teeth begin to grow as the old teeth fall out. But you cannot have the old teeth fall out unless the gums become weak enough, loose enough. So you see, there's a rationale in the whole approach for which the body has to be brought to that point of severe depletion. And then the new teeth begin to grow. Old hair falls off as the new hair begins to grow. And once this process is sufficiently activated, the food does not suddenly kick in because it would stop the process. You slowly grow the food again. And as it begins to grow, the body starts rebuilding rapidly with the new tissue. With the autophagy at maximized, new tissue is replacing rapidly until you complete the process. And the exact duration, there are many ways it could be done. In the description in the book, we find about 3 months the first time. Another time he does it for a whole year. Each time he comes out completely young. But I want to point to the rationale of these processes with our current understanding of science. There comes another peculiar dimension to it. Why in a hut dug into the ground, mud walls and the leaf and wood covering, in total darkness? What's the point of this? Now you could say at that time, well, it was the convenient thing to do. You didn't have the modern buildings with cement. As it turns out, we find a description in the book of a last attempt he did not for himself but for certain politicians, including Madan Mohan Malviya, very famous at that point. They did not get the same dramatic result. They did it in a conventional building in darkness. Didn't have the same result. So what is the secret behind this? And this is coming from some of the estimations that I'm making based on current science and the research, but I'll put it more as a hypothesis, which can be validated, but which is rational. We find that, and this is a very recent discovery about, I would say nearly 2 years ago, that the far infrared rays exposed to the cells trigger inside the cells the production of melatonin and regeneration. Now, this is a recent discovery. Relate this to what we have just been describing, and then you find something extraordinary. Mud, when heated by sun, gives off far infrared, especially if it has certain kinds of silicates and substances. In particular, there is a substance called tourmaline. If it is mixed into the mud, tourmaline is one of the best producers of far infrared. But wood and leaves, dried leaves, are reflectors of far infrared as well as generators of far infrared when heated in sunlight. So here is a hut built to create a room of intense far infrared saturation on the entire body day and night, even after the sun sets, because the mud remains warm. And that far infrared soaking into the body is triggering, it penetrates a few centimeters at least, triggers the production of melatonin inside the cells, which is, as you know, one of the most powerful antioxidants, which is also regenerating the cells at the same time. But that's not enough. There's something else. The darkness is required because otherwise the body itself, which would be producing melatonin and soaked in melatonin in the bloodstream, would begin to shut down melatonin production. So the rationale for the darkness combines now with the materials used and the far infrared experience. All of these fit perfectly with the current understanding of science of cellular rejuvenation. When you look back at this amazing description of a process which sounds so simple superficially seen, but which has a combination of such profound multi-dimension, multifaceted impact, you wonder, how did these people know that this would work? It's not something you could sit down and say, hey, let me try this, perhaps it will work. You would have tried many other things which would be far more rational to try out first. Where did they get this knowledge? More importantly, one critical factor is involved here. Remember, you are going to be for 3 months in this dark room, which is not going to be the size of this hall. You need to have the walls close enough for far infrared penetration. For 3 months, you're pretty much lying down doing nothing. And you're told you need to be praying and meditating all the time, not doing exercises, not chatting. Why? You would simply have said, oh, well, that's the only way to survive. Yes, perhaps that's an angle. But there's something else which is involved. Remember, there's also serotonin, which is a precursor for melatonin, which is being produced. And serotonin is a state, as we say, happy state. If you are in a state of tension, if you are stressed, if you are troubled, all your biology is going to shut down the very processes which are being used to regenerate the body. You need to be in a state of calm, peace, and joy. And therefore, the state of prayerfulness and meditation required. Not everyone can do that. In order to pass through this process, you need to have some base of a deeper spiritual practice of some kind of meditation, at least, to be able to stay doing nothing but in a state of calm and happiness, isn't it? So here comes a very important psycho-spiritual dimension to what would be otherwise have been purely energetic and biological process, but which not only complements, but is even effectively, we see, a driver of the energetic and biological process. Because if just that is disrupted, the entire chain is broken down, the top-down chain. So I'm presenting to here the rationale behind what would otherwise have been not so obvious, fully confirmed with our current science, but adding a whole new dimension to it. And I come back to this question, how did they know that this would work? Because it works, and they've used it. And there are people even today who use it, they all keep very quiet. So I'm not sure if I'm doing them justice by speaking about it in a forum like this, but this needs to be reviewed, validated, explored with the current tools that we have of science. But still the question, how did they know? If they could know and discover the process of doing this, can we today acquire the same knowledge or the same means of knowledge that they had? And if we ask these questions, perhaps we open ourselves to a whole new dimension of exploration, not just of youthfulness and regeneration of the body, but also of general health and healing. And here I'm going to come back to that point which I began with. Why is it that across the centuries, across all traditions, there is this constant drive to find this immortality and youthfulness? Why cannot human beings simply say, oh, well, we age, we die, so what, just get used to it? This is a very important question because it goes to the crux of the point. Because somewhere deep within us, we know that aging and sickness are a falsehood. We know that we are inherently, essentially spirit, immortal, ever young. And because we know that, therefore this contrast with the falsehood of external reality provokes us to question and say, but it should not be like this. I should be healthy, I should be young, I should be forever. Because I am deep within. Except I'm not conscious of that on the surface. Yet that being my deepest truth becomes my prime driver for everything I do. Look at yourself, look at all of history across all civilizations. Everybody in some form or other is looking for this permanence. The Buddha sought permanence, outside life eventually, in a consciousness of the absolute. But on the other hand, you find a tyrant or a politician finds permanence by creating something in his own name, so that when his body dies, the name survives. All drivers finally come back to soul drivers distorted by the surface ego complex. If we can now consciously realign with our deepest soul aspiration and soul values and its drives, we can more directly and spontaneously bring its action into effect in our own lives. I'm going to put it more directly, more bluntly. The part of you that is always immortal and or ever young is your inmost soul, is the real you. And if you want your physical body and mind and emotions to also become young, youthful, fresh, plastic, you need to realign them to your soul, which is already that. Or putting another way, the more your alignment with the soul is off track, the more rapidly you age. The more your alignment is close to the soul values, aspiration, and influence, the less rapidly you age, or the more you seem to be youthful despite biological aging. And we have all met people like that. What would be the point if your biology is youthful, but your mind is an oxymoron? You live in the consciousness of a dinosaur with a body of a young man. It does not help. Your consciousness itself must have rediscovered its own youth by alignment to the source of your deepest youth, to the part of you that's always young. So we see here an approach which complements, which completes, but which also is potentially even more powerful than the purely biological approach. And this you will see in the case of many people who biologically old, who are in deep practice of meditation. You look at their face and you say, this person is so young, so youthful, so fresh, so energetic, so plastic, so adaptive, which is what we would all want to be. That would be the true sense of being young. There's a further dimension to this. Considering that even if at some point we have to shed the physical body, if you have aligned yourself sufficiently with your soul's consciousness, you can shed the physical body and take on a new physical body with complete continuity of consciousness. Effectively, you would have an immortality. Your biology would be, as they say in the science fiction, sleeves. You take on the body, okay, that's the maximum I could take it to with the best supplements and the best methods. Switch the body now, but I continue. Also possible, also doable, and there are very good examples of this, as many of you would know. So with this, I bring to you a dimension which is largely ignored in the approach to well-being, anti-aging, and youthfulness. Into this, I will simply say to you, a key point, what can we do? We can't say, okay, I'm going to start meditating now. Maybe that helps, but it's going to take time to get to that point where you're aligned with the soul. What can you do now? And I want to give you something which you can begin to put into practice as we are today and change our lives from this inside-out basis. Recognizing, and as all of you know in the medical practice with a deeper dimension, all change begins inside out and top down. So align yourself with your deepest truth, with your highest aspiration. What does that mean in practice? Every morning when you wake up, as soon as you're fresh, sit for a few minutes. Become conscious of who you are. Who you are in your deepest, not your superficial mode, not the way people know you, but the way you know yourself. And then go still deeper. What is your deepest aspiration? What is your deepest sense of purpose? Why did you take birth? Who are you truly? Just the sense of it. You don't have to use words. And simply go deep, deep, deep into yourself. As deep as you can. It does not matter how deep. As deep as you can. And every day it will be perhaps deeper or different. Doesn't matter. Remaining centered in that, as close to your deepest center as possible. From there, turn your outlook towards life. Seen from that poise, all your values will change. Things on which you were reacting, you will find no more reactions. Things which were for you extremely critical and urgent may not be so. Other things which you were neglecting perhaps become now much more important. Your perspective changes. Hold that perspective. Hold that state. And from there, re-engage with life without losing that poise. Don't worry if you lose it. You will lose it in the beginning. But don't worry if you lose it. You've begun the day in a different center. And each day that you continue to do this, your base will shift deeper and you will be more aligned with yourself. And in a very rapid period of a few days or weeks or months, you will find you will be more youthful, more young, more happy, more content. People will begin to notice the difference on your face and even on your biology. We had the example yesterday, we were speaking with Pierre, and he was speaking of how he measures his biology age. Then he goes for 4 months into nature, lives a life which is completely different, almost like a monastic. Comes back after those 4 months and his biology has already measurably regressed in age by some 10 years. In 4 months. What did he do? Yes, of course, you can look at the biological triggers, epigenetic triggers. But the consciousness change is the most powerful change. Begin to do this, all the external stresses of your life will dissolve. You will begin to live from deeper and higher values. The second thing, which is extremely important, and this comes from the science of yoga. There is an innate faith deep within us. The word in Sanskrit is Shraddha. It's not belief, it's faith. Faith inherently is something you already know because you already are. You see, the belief is when somebody tells you, oh, by the way, science tells you that your thoughts are just ripples in the brain, you don't actually exist, you're here by chance. Ah, yes, I believe that. I write that to pass an exam and get my certification as a doctor. Right? We've all done that. What do you know? I know that I am. I know that I'm not here by chance. There is something to be done, some purpose for which I exist. That is the innate faith. So distinguish between beliefs which are fake, which are a paint on the surface, which can be washed off, from a deep innate faith. But the deepest faith of the soul is of immortality and eternal youthfulness. But there are also intermediate, distorted faiths which have been imposed upon us. For example, the faith that you cannot get well unless you eat this medicine. And the doctor hammers this faith into you. It's a false faith. It's an error. But they hammer it into you to the point that the moment you take the medicine in your hand, before you eat it, you already begin to feel well. You've seen this in yourself. You've seen this in others. Understand how this works. Use it powerfully. The present science dismisses the power of faith by saying it's the placebo effect or the nocebo effect, and you must chop it out. No, use it powerfully. And this is the yogic knowledge. Shri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, that which is your innate faith is what you become. And so, if you realign yourself with the innate faith of your deepest soul, that you are young, that you are forever, you can achieve anything, realize anything, know anything, fulfill anything, manifest anything that you truly choose to do from within. Not some superficial desire. To know that, to become aware of that, and then to let that activate within you will completely change your working. If your body has the faith that it needs medicine to be cured, you will need the medicine. If the body now is infused with the faith that it has within itself the capacity to regenerate and heal itself, That faith activated, you'll find your body developing resilience and independence from external supports. Build that faith deeply in the mind and in the body, but it will be infused from top down and inside out. These are things we can do right now. And the result you will know within days, within weeks, and certain things in a few months, and that is very rapid. You can recast entirely your entire personality, even heal illnesses rapidly. I'll give one last example of this. This is medically recorded evidence. You know, there are people who have multiple personalities. In the yogic tradition, we will say it's a possession where one person flips, another person comes in, etc. But what is seen interestingly, in the same biology, when one personality kicks in, he has diabetes. With all the side effects of diabetes, the personality flips, another personality comes, he is free of diabetes, the fellow can eat all the sugar he wants with no reaction. For days. Flip back to the other personality, you have all the symptoms of diabetes. This completely overthrows all current understanding of what diabetes works or what illness actually is. It means if you flip at a certain deeper level, the energetic mold of habit of your consciousness, you can instantly replace a disease or create a disease. In other words, disease is nothing but habit of your energy, habit of your body in a certain fixed mold, which can be reconfigured just as simply as flipping, if you have the capacity to do that. That knowledge, that capacity, that technology, and the science with which you understand this and can put this into real-life application is what we call the knowledge of yoga. Thank you. Namaste.